Right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Courtney Stone, and I'm the Animal Care Manager here at Annenberg PetSpace. We're so excited to bring you the latest installment in our Wellness Workshop series. These sessions are designed to help you strengthen your bond between you and your pets through the guidance of experts who will explore practical everyday issues for pet parents. Today, we are excited to host our very own Katie McGuire, who is the Animal Behavior and Training Coordinator at Annenberg PetSpace. She works with all of our adoptable pets and also teaches our Mutt Manners dog training classes. Today, she's going to be talking about our dog's negative behaviors while on a leash and how to change these habits for the better. We'll begin with a presentation from Katie, and we'll have time for a Q&A session afterwards. So please hold your questions until then. Before we begin, just a quick reminder that we are open to the public for in-space programming and adoptions by appointment. Check out annenbergpetspace.org for more details. Now, I am pleased to introduce Katie McGuire. She is an accomplished certified pet dog trainer with more than 13 years of experience. She previously worked as an on-set safety representative with the American Humane Association, ensuring that animals were being treated humanely during film and television productions. She has also launched her own dog training business. Katie competes with her own dogs in agility, conformation, rally obedience, and competition obedience, earning many wins and competing at the national level. She joined the Annenberg PetSpace team in 2018, first as our Mutt Manners trainer and last year as our full-time trainer. Please join me in welcoming Katie.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to be here.
Well, thank you for joining me, Katie. I know you have a busy day, but I know we have an exciting topic to talk about today. So we're excited and happy to hear everything you have to say.
Yay. Well, I'm really excited about this as well. This is something that has been a passion of mine for a lot of my career, actually. I got into specifically helping reactive dogs because my own dog was reactive. And I had tried to work through some methods originally that did not work very well. And so I had to develop some new communication elements and methods to help her out.
Wow. Well, yeah. How about we get started and hear all about those methods?
All right. So we'll see if we can get all of the technology stuff handled today. All right. Now, let me make sure I'm doing all of this right. Okay, does that look good to you?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, good. All right, so we're gonna get started. How to help your leash reactive dog. So really, one of the things that we want to talk about is what is leash reactivity? And this is something that seems fairly simple. Most of us are probably here because we understand what leash reactivity is, but it helps to really clarify it first to begin with. So it is when a leash dog reacts to the presence of a specific stimulus or trigger. Triggers are usually other dogs or unknown humans, but they can also be other animals or objects like squirrels, cars, skateboards, etc. Some dogs will only react to certain dogs, humans, or objects. So some dogs will only react to people wearing hats, or to large dogs, or to specific types of noisy trucks that go by, right? It can be very particular. What we're really talking about, though, is an overreaction. So it's, we react to the world all day, and so do our dogs. When they're out, anything that they do really is a reaction to their environment. The issue that we're talking about is that it's an overreaction. It's a behavior that we really don't like, that's too big. And this is somebody showing us what it looks like. All right, so that's our little snippet of what a reaction can look like. See that forward lunging motion, the barking. He actually had his weight so much forward, he didn't even have his front paws on the ground for some of that. And one of the things that we want to think about with this is Is my dog being aggressive? Are they excited? Are they frustrated? Are they afraid? Are they being territorial or protective? And it really could be any of these or a combination of them. There could be a lot of different things going on. So, what does it look like? Lunging, whining, growling, barking. These are the things that we saw in that video. These are kind of the most common things that we see with reactivity, but we also want to talk about some more subtle signs. Piloerection, which is where we've got the raised hackles on the back, so the hair stands up, and it can be anywhere from, between the shoulder blades all the way down the back to the tail. Staring, and really like a firm, solid stare. Freezing, especially if they are panting and then they close their mouths. Whale eye, which is where you see the whites around the eyes. Having their ears alert and forward, and the tail high and twitching. So obviously these subtle signs, you can't take each one of these all by itself and say that the dog is being reactive. Each dog is an individual, and the way that they're going to present their body language before they react or as they go into a reaction is going to be individual to them. One of the reasons why I really like to look at these things very specifically is because if my dog has leash reactivity issues, I want to be able to identify the more subtle signs before they react so that I can be ready and I can do something about it ahead of time. So I love this little picture, by the way. So why does my dog do this? So there are kind of two categories that I put this into. The first one is to keep the trigger away. So that's being defensive. What that means is that they want to keep whatever that trigger, so that thing that causes them to react, or the thing that they're reacting to, they want to keep it away. And that could come from a past trauma. Traumas could sometimes be obvious and sometimes be subtle. Sometimes we don't know our dog's history. Other times we do. And if we know that they've had a really negative experience with something, so been attacked by another dog or had a really negative experience with a human or a car or a skateboard, any of those things, it can be easy to identify what trauma could have led to this. But sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes there are things that we didn't necessarily see as traumatic to our dogs, but they might have. They may have not been interested in greeting another dog, and the other dog came up to them anyways and kind of accosted them and tried to get them to play. And then the next time my dog sees another dog on the walk, he starts barking and lunging in order to keep that dog away from him. It can sometimes be difficult to connect those two experiences, but in the dog's mind, they were connected. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always related to a trauma. There could also just be a lack of early socialization. The socialization period is really early on. It's usually before we even get our puppies. It's between 4 and 10 weeks, about sometimes up to 12 weeks. And so it's easy to have some things lacking within that period of time. And that can lead to a fear of whatever it is that they're reacting to. So the trigger, or perceiving the trigger as a threat specifically. And then there's also genetic predisposition. And this could come from a lot of different things. They could be a little bit more genetically predisposed to be fearful or protective. We have intentionally bred many different breeds of dogs to protect us. And so sometimes they are going to be genetically predisposed to barking at things that they deem a threat or scary. And then there's also the getting closer to the trigger, so an offensive version of this. This could be because they are excited about greeting the other dog. And it could actually be, or the person as well, right? It could be other triggers, but it's usually other dogs, sometimes people. Or it could be frustration about not being able to greet because of the leash. But in these cases, the whole idea is that the dog wants to get closer to the trigger. And once again, it could be any of these, or it could be a combination of them. We also don't necessarily need to identify exactly why my dog is reacting in order to train. But I do think it's important to get an understanding of why this could be happening. So we're going to talk about speaking dog, understanding their point of view. And this is really important, just as I was just saying, because we do want to get an idea of what it is that is potentially causing this with my dog. Understanding is really the key to developing good communication. So the leash changes the picture. The leash is unnatural, right? It changes the dog's body language. What can happen very often is as the dog pulls forward to try and get to or try to ward off whatever the trigger is, it actually puts their weight completely forward. As you saw in that little video clip that I shared, that dog's front legs were almost not even touching the ground most of the time. And not only does that create, or it actually influences that own dog's behavior, but it can influence other humans and dogs' behavior around that dog. Sometimes that can be, it can cause them to be less likely to approach. Sometimes it can cause them to be more likely to confront if they approach, causing a dog fight. So there can be a lot of different things that are actually changed just by the presence of the leash. It inhibits their ability to approach naturally. So not only does it change where their weight is shifted and the look as they approach another dog or human, but it also changes how they would naturally approach. So dogs would naturally approach with a little bit of like a wide semicircle and then come around and sniff each other's rear ends first. And they can't do that on a leash because we're usually doing head-on approaches when they're on a leash, and that causes them to be face-to-face, eye contact first. And that can be quite confrontational with dogs. So once again, even if my dog didn't necessarily start in a reactive mode, if they go into something that way, another dog might actually take that approach as confrontational and an altercation could occur, which of course then snowballs into a very consistent pattern of having bad experiences on leash. And it also prevents them from being able to opt out or avoid greetings altogether. Often when we are on our walks on leashes, we're on sidewalks, we generally are not going to be able to move away very well. And when that happens, it takes away my dog's ability to retreat if they need to, or to avoid. And that can cause them to make a decision that they're going to bark and lunge and be reactive in order to get the other dog or person to stay away, rather than be able to opt out and just leave. And learning history very much influences behavior as well. So past experiences, as we talked about, trauma, but it doesn't always have to be traumatic, just past experiences, both positive and negative, can have an impact. Negative or unpleasant experiences can cause future defensiveness, and positive or exciting experiences can cause future excitement and potential leash frustration. So one of the things that I very much like to think about with this, and I did mention a little bit before, is my dog really enjoying a greeting or just tolerating it? This is something that we see a lot because I often hear, oh, my dog was fine. Everything was fine. But there's a whole picture to that, right? My dog may not have been fine. If my dog's tail was down, ears were back, and he was hunkered down while another dog was sniffing him, he might have come out of that and been okay, but he also might have internalized that and said, this was really not a great thing. I didn't have a good experience. And next time, maybe I will bark and lunge in order for that dog to stay away so I don't have to go through that. We don't always know what may have instigated our dog to become reactive, but once again, I think it's important to explore that and understand it. And also, if you have a dog that is not reactive, be aware of all of these things so that you don't potentially have one who becomes reactive. Prevention is actually really, really important with this. When it comes to positive experiences that can cause future excitement and potential leash frustration, I really like to think about what is happening in that moment. So if the dog has learned that greeting is positive, possibly leading to playtime, they can get overly excited in anticipation of that playtime. Frustration about not being able to greet can appear aggressive at times. And so when we talk about leash frustration, what that means is they want to get to the other dog. They're lunging and barking and pulling, but they can't get to that other dog. And it actually almost tips into sounding more aggressive, which can be very confusing. And the aggression is frustration in that case. Frustration about not being able to greet can appear aggressive. And then this version of leash reactivity or frustration is often reinforced by being able to greet the other dog or human after throwing a reactive leash tantrum. So what happens is a lot of times if we know our dogs get along with other dogs and people, but they do this on the leash, sometimes we will inadvertently, because we want that reaction to stop and because we know that they're ultimately friendly, we'll let them go and greet the person even though they're throwing that tantrum. And what can happen is not only are they getting rewarded for that reactivity, but they are also building themselves up and they're getting really revved and highly aroused. And that can actually cause a potential problem. So you may have a dog who started out being frustrated or overly excited, but then because they go in with that level of energy and being so revved up, either my dog or the other dog or person who's experiencing that, they could potentially get into an altercation. Probably not a human, but if it's another dog, it could potentially lead to an altercation because they can't understand exactly what's going on with that dog, why they're going so crazy and they seem so over the top. So even if your dog is excited, this is not a good way to greet. It can cause over arousal and it can just create confusion and potentially lead to more serious issues. But this is not to say that either type of experience will always cause the dog to become reactive. It is important to understand how our dog can interpret these experiences, but of course, positive and negative experiences happen all the time. And I don't want you to think that every single one is going to cause a reactive dog, because that's not the case, but it can. So let's go to the next one. We've got speaking dog. So each dog is a unique individual. Some dogs like everyone they meet, some are selective, and some prefer to keep to themselves. This is a really, really big one, and this is one that we so often forget. We have a tendency to feel like our dogs should love everyone, and we want our dogs to love everyone a lot of the time. But dogs are individuals, and not all of them are going to love everyone that they meet, whether dogs or humans. So it's important that we acknowledge that about our dogs and we don't force them into any interactions where they're uncomfortable. I might be fine with a smile and a hug from a friend, but if a stranger on the street tries to walk up to me and give me a hug, I might not feel the same way, especially right now, by the way. But in general, that's something that I like to just kind of point out, because dogs are going to be selective. It's natural for them to be that way. And recognizing when our dogs are comfortable and when they're not comfortable is going to really go a long way in helping us deal with this issue and also prevent it in the future. We're not going to be able to change who our dogs are. They are who they are, but we can change how they behave and feel about certain situations. And the other thing that's really important is that we are our dogs' guardians and caretakers. It is our job to take care of them and to teach them how to be confident in the world. And that's a piece that is at the very center of dealing with this issue, because sometimes when we want our dogs to get along, we will push them into situations that they're not comfortable with. And then what happens is we actually break the trust. So I've asked my dog to trust me when we go out on a walk, that I'll keep them safe in the world. And if I force them into a situation where they're not comfortable, they learn to not trust me and to go ahead and handle it on their own, right? I'm uncomfortable about something. Instead of looking to my person, I'm going to just go ahead and bark and lunge and get rid of that threat all on my own. So we want to be really careful to take care of our dogs and build that trust and hold it sacred. And it's crucial. Yeah, exactly. It's crucial that we don't force them into situations where they're uncomfortable. Exactly what I just said. But it is important that we teach them what we want them to do. And context is important. This is another one that can be really confusing. Different situations can cause different behaviors and reactions. So many dogs will be fine with other people and dogs in most contexts, but then overreact to them in specific situations. For example, in their own neighborhood, when they haven't seen anyone in a while on a walk and then someone pops up, or if a dog hits the fence barking really hard, that will potentially cause a reaction. And you know what? That is honestly the same for us. We sometimes can get confused about why that happens, but if you put it into context for humans, I would be completely comfortable walking around an outdoor mall with a bunch of different people around. Not a big deal. I mean, once again, maybe not as much right now, but we're getting there. But if I'm walking down a dark alley at night and I see another person walking towards me, I might get a little bit uncomfortable. It's a different situation, it's a different environment, and the context is different. The same thing can happen with our dogs. It's just that we might not understand exactly why that is. So, what is the solution? How can we help our dogs to change the pattern of overreacting? So we're going to do this by utilizing positive reinforcement techniques to help change how our dogs feel about the trigger. It's really important. And we're going to work on creating effective communication and teaching what we want them to do in the situation. We are going to work on setting up effective and safe training sessions and building trust that we will keep them safe and comfortable. So, basic foundations for dealing with leash reactivity. The keys to success. We're going to go through equipment, rewards, body positioning, quality over quantity, and setting up successful training sessions. So equipment, I know, look at that face, she's so cute. So with equipment, really what's preferred is a harness. Front connect is preferred, a head halter or regular flat collar or martingale. For this, and really everything that we do training wise here, is no chain, prong, or correction collars. Now, the point that I want to make with this that's really, really important is that we want to stay away from corrections when we're doing this work. It can actually rev up the dog sometimes, making them more intense about their reactions. And then the thing that I really focus on is the major reason I want to stay away from corrections is because they can actually be associated with the trigger, right? We think of it as I've given my dog a correction for barking, growling, lunging, but I can't always interpret exactly what my dog is taking from that. And so it would actually be quite easy for my dog to interpret that seeing that trigger means that they get a correction. And if, corrections are by nature unpleasant, and so what happens then is my dog connects the presence of the trigger with something unpleasant. My dog is probably going to be much more likely to try to keep that trigger away at whatever cost they can to make sure that they don't get the unpleasant correction from me. And also they have a tendency to, I think, in my anthropomorphizing moment, I think that they kind of go, oh, well, my person really doesn't like that, whatever that trigger is either, because they got tense and they pulled on me and it became a whole negative situation altogether. But really, and I will tell you, in my many years of doing this, I have had times where I have worked with clients where I didn't even have to do any training. I just told them to take off the correction device, and we actually got rid of the problem because the dog was just associating the trigger with the correction itself. So that's a piece that is really important with this work. Yeah, so barking, lunging, and growling is likely to keep other dogs and humans away. If we assume that our dog has taken that concept of correction as associated with the trigger, then the best way to keep that trigger away is to react really big. Chances are people aren't going to walk over with their dog if your dog is barking and lunging and growling, right? So really it worked. So the other pieces to this are we want to make sure we do no longer than a 6-foot leash, no extendable or flexi leashes. They just don't give us enough control in this scenario. And whenever we're in an area where distractions or triggers are present or potentially present, the leash should be held at a point no further than 2 feet from the clasp attaching to the collar, harness, etc. And really 6 to 12 inches is best. Now, this obviously depends on the height of your dog. So if you have a very small dog, it has to be a little bit longer. But the idea with this is that we want to help stop a reaction more quickly and give the dog less leverage and less potential to injure you or themselves if they lunge. This is also why a harness is a good idea, but ultimately we are going to set up these sessions with the intention of making sure that reactions don't happen, but training in the real world means reactions sometimes will happen. So we want to make sure that we've got safety. And one of the ways that is going to help is by having maintaining a short leash. So this is not to say that the leash is tight. The leash should be slack without tension. In order for this to be possible, the dog must be close at your side and paying attention to you. The hand closest to the dog should be holding the set length of leash and the other hand holding the slack of the leash and the handle. So essentially what that means is I've got 2 hands on the leash at all times, and whichever side my dog is on is going to be holding the slack of leash so that there's only a length. The shortest length is from my hand to the dog. Yeah, that was my border collie Opal doing a lovely leave it with those treats. So rewards. Toy and food rewards are both great, but when it comes to working around distracting stimuli, especially those that can cause reactions, food is usually best because it can keep the situation calmer. It's very difficult to reward with toys and get play going if you want to keep everybody calm and not reactive. For this work, you really want to keep a hierarchy of treats. At home, I like to only use boring treats or just their kibble. And then when out, I keep a variety of different types of treats for different levels of distractions. And then the absolute favorite treat for my dog is the one that I'm going to use for the trigger. So if my dog thinks that hot dogs are the greatest thing in the whole wide world, then hot dogs are going to be used only when my dog is in the presence of the trigger. So body positioning and handling skills. Now, these are all elements to put this picture together. So I just want to kind of talk about how we're going to be utilizing body positioning and handling skills, but I want to be aware that this is not a primary training method. It's just important to know so that you can handle situations in the real world, because after all, this is something that occurs very often in the real world. So for this work, your dog must always be at your side, right or left, or facing you if you're stationary. The idea really with that is your dog could be a little bit behind your leg, and more forward is okay if they're looking at you. But the whole concept here is that if my dog is out ahead of me, staring at the trigger, they're very likely to react because they are not paying attention to me. They're already paying attention to the trigger. So I want to get that focus back on me. You're always going to have your dog walk on the opposite side of you away from the distraction. So if I'm on, let's say I'm in a park, walking one direction and there's another person with another dog coming the other direction, I'm going to make sure that my dog is on the opposite side of me. That way I have my body between the dog and the distraction, and it allows me a lot more control with not only the leash, but also being able to body block if I need to. You never want to move in the direction that your dog is pulling. You want to stand your ground or move in the opposite direction. So if your dog decides to start pulling towards the distraction, even if they're not actually reacting yet, don't go with them. Don't move into that leash pressure. You want to actually move away from it and kind of reset. And body blocking, I want to just define kind of what that means. And really, this is, once again, for if you get into a situation where you need to use it, but this is not going to be a primary method. Body blocking is when you use your body to block your dog's forward motion. And when you do this, you want to match your dog's movements back and forth until she stops attempting to get by you and instead looks at you. It's important to keep the leash at a short length, 6 to 12 inches again, when doing this to help prevent your dog from zooming around you. And again, this is not a primary method, but it's important to know in case you're in a situation where you may need it. And it's common to end up in these kinds of situations where you might need it if you have a reactive dog. And here's a little example of utilizing body language and body blocking. So here I'm setting up because I know another dog is coming by. And so I'm putting the dog right in front of me. I'm making sure we've got a short leash. I've got treats to give her right there. And if you can see, my left leg's a little bit forward to block her. And then as the dog goes to the other side, I'm going to reposition myself to make sure that I'm blocking that way as well. And then we get lots of praise and goodies because she did so good. And then we're going to talk about quality over quantity. So it is much more important to have quality sessions and walks than it is to have frequent ones. We have a tendency to kind of think that we are going to desensitize our dog by just constantly exposing them to the trigger, and that's not the case. Sometimes it can happen, but it's not a good way to go about it. We can't really trust that that's going to be our best option. So it's really important to set up sessions where the dog doesn't have a reaction. It's much more important than getting out there all the time. We want to actively create training scenarios where the dog can remain under threshold and not react. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So understanding thresholds. Essentially thresholds are, you can be under threshold or over threshold. The distance at which the dog can notice a trigger but not react is under threshold. And if they are reacting, they are over threshold. Let me start over. When over threshold, they are flooded with hormones like cortisol, along with others, and it causes a fight or flight response. When in this mode, the dog is no longer able to intake information in the same way, and their learning capabilities are inhibited. So that's why we always want to keep them under threshold, because when they're over threshold, they're really not able to learn anymore. They're being flooded by all of these hormones, they're emotional, and they're responding just off of those emotions. If a reaction occurs, it's actually more likely that another one will occur because those hormones are still in the dog's body. And hormones like cortisol can remain in the body for up to 72 hours. So it is really important to try and create sessions and walks where we can manage our dog and train enough to make sure that they don't have a reaction. Because if we have a reaction, we're much more likely to have one probably within the next 72 hours because those hormones are already going. And when you have a reactive dog, every walk is a training walk. Only go to locations with few to no distractions, or at times when that is possible. Sometimes you need to walk during off times on your outings. When you do those outings, work on your dog's obedience tricks, and eye contact is a big one. And then this is also to limit your dog's ability to practice the reactive behavior. If it's not possible to keep your dog under threshold, avoid the situation. When in places where your dog may have a reaction, always keep her on leash, even if it is a long leash. You really want to make sure that you always have control over the situation. And we've got a little video here.
So at enough of a distance that she can still focus on me. This is right about the edge because she was able to focus on me over there, but she, even when we're back here, she still will occasionally look, do some whining, do some circles. We don't get a full-blown reaction, yeah, but we get we get some over arousal. So what we want to do ideally is stick right about here, click and treat for eye contact or focus. Sometimes that could just be orienting towards me. I'd really like it to be eye contact though. Nice! And we're using high value treats for this, so she's getting some turkey breast. Yes! And when I can see that it's really nice and consistent, awesome, good girl, we're gonna go ahead and move forward a bit. Yes. Very good. And then we're gonna stop just a few feet forward and do it again. Same exact thing. Awesome. Yay, good girl. Very good. And she's remaining focused on me, so we're gonna move forward again. The idea is we want to stay under threshold, meaning we keep her at a point where she's able to focus and still work without getting so close that she reacts. Good job. And then what we do is we gradually change where that threshold is. Down. Awesome. So we gradually get that threshold closer and closer to the other dog so that she can work around and near other dogs without it being such a stressor for her. Good job. Awesome. So we're going to move a little closer again. Awesome. Very good. Yes. Look at that. That's beautiful. So this is right at the edge now, right? This is right where she's like, oh, okay, I don't know. He's there. Good job. Yay! That was so good. Oh. Good girl. So even though that wasn't a look directly at me, because I've increased the distraction by having the other dog bark, and she's not lunging forward, I'm going to go ahead and reward that, even though we're not getting the direct look at me. Oh, look at that, but now she is. That's awesome. Awesome, and that's enough. Thank you. How great is that? Yeah? Oh, you're so good. Look at you. I know, it's hard, but you're doing really good. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. What a good girl. A little bit closer. Nice. Good. Now, the name of the game when it comes to dealing with reactivity is practice. Good job. So we're not going to go beyond the gate today. We're going to stay here. We're going to make this very reinforcing for her. And then we're going to call it. Yay! Woo! 10 minutes, and ideally we'd do this 5 to 7 days a week. Cool.
So the idea with that is that we want to set up short, effective sessions. We don't want to drain our dogs by going out and having them exposed to a bunch of things. One of the things that can actually happen is we see trigger stacking. So our dogs see one trigger and they're fine, and they see a second trigger and they're fine. And then by the third trigger, they just can't handle it anymore, and then they start reacting. What we want to do is actually create very quality, easy sessions for our dogs to be successful in, even if it's our walk, which might mean we go during off times. It might mean that we create a whole lot of distance, find areas that are not so triggering. We can do several different things. And so specifically setting up successful training sessions. And you can see in this background picture that is a fake dog, and all the way back there at the gate is the other dog who sees the fake dog. And when we're setting up successful training sessions, we want to make sure that we are utilizing a clicker or a verbal marker. So you heard in that video, I was using a clicker. The clicker is used to mark the correct behavior and tell the dog that that was right and that they are going to receive a treat. You could also use a verbal marker like yes, if you would like to. And if you do, you want to make sure that you are very consistent with your tone, and you're very consistent about using that same word and always following it with a treat. You also would like to train certain skills without the distractions first. So skills like focus, sit, and loose leash walking or heel on both sides. And then when you're ready to set up a training session, you want to find a trigger that is as mild and controllable as possible. So the fake dog that I have here is a very good one. If your dog's trigger is a human, you can ask a friend to help and set up in a large, quiet, and neutral location. Don't ask them to come to your front door. That's going to be very, very triggering for most dogs. Or coming into your backyard. That's going to be hard. Try to find a big park where there's not a whole lot going on and you can have them set up at a distance. Same thing, if your dog's trigger is another dog, you can use a fake dog or you can ask a friend that has a calm dog to help. And then you want to use distance to help control the situation. You want to stay far enough away that your dog can maintain focus on you. And then if your dog does react, that means you're too close. They're over threshold and you need to back up and get to a point where they can focus on you again. So drive to success, creating positive and effective training sessions. We're going to set a path for success, and we're going to learn to train in neutral, forward, and reverse. All right, so this is our foundation work. So with our foundation work, the first step is going to be creating a safe enough distance to keep our dog under threshold, and then reward the dog frequently with high value rewards whenever the trigger is present. Don't forget to praise and be happy with your dog too. Your dog doesn't need to do anything to earn the rewards at this point. They are just happening because a distraction is present and she is not lunging or barking. So essentially, presence of the trigger equals a reward. Absence of the trigger equals no more rewards. Very, very simple. I have my dog in front of me, another dog comes into view, and that could be at a great distance. And then I immediately start rewarding my dog for nothing, just because the other dog is there. And then step 2 is after several repetitions, if you see calm body language from your dog, you can begin to mark, click or verbal marker, as soon as she looks at the trigger, and then you immediately reward and treat. If she doesn't look back to you for the reward, then you're going to go back to the first step. So essentially, once we've kind of loaded the trigger, so the trigger is present and we get treats. Once we've done that a few times, then we're going to start working on waiting a moment. And then when my dog looks at the trigger, I can click or say yes. And then my dog, when they want the treat, they're going to orient back to me to get the treat. If they don't orient back to me, so if they're still staring at the trigger and I have to kind of get their attention and give them the treat, that means they're not ready for that step and we have to go back. And then we have a little example video.
Good girl, Sadie. Yes, that's amazing. Good. Yes. Good. Yay! Good girl. Oh, who's that? Awesome. Yay. Yay.
So you could see as soon as she looked, then she got that click and the treat. So once we've laid that foundation, then we want to think about how to utilize this in training sessions and in the real world. And so that's going to be starting in neutral. So once you've spent some time doing the foundation steps, it's time to test your dog's threshold limits. And I do not mean that we want to push it, right? We want to have success, but we want to kind of see where those thresholds are and work on moving our thresholds closer to the trigger. So we want to start at the distance that you have been doing your foundation work and have your clicker and treats ready, or your verbal yes. And once your dog sees the distraction, calmly and quietly wait. Don't say anything or do anything yet. And this is a big point that is really difficult But when my dog starts to stare at the distraction, at the trigger, if I've been doing all this foundation work, the idea is I want to wait and see if my dog will choose to look back at me, to orient back to me, and then I can reward them for that. But it's tempting to correct them for looking at the trigger. And as we have established before, as we explained before, that can be a real problem. So I don't want to correct my dog for looking at the trigger. It can actually cause a reaction. It often does cause a reaction. So I actually stay completely silent until my dog makes a decision about what it is they're going to do. So be sure that your leash is loose, no tension from your hand to the dog's collar, but that you have a good hold of it in case your dog decides to lunge. If your dog pulls forward, stand your ground and don't move with the dog. If this happens, the leash will be tight as your dog is pulling, but for this scenario, it's okay. So you want the leash to be loose, but if your dog pulls forward but is not reacting, you're just going to stand your ground and hold the leash as is. Don't go with them, but the leash will be tight. And we've got another video. So this is working on kind of all of these skills together, but we've got some examples of kind of where we moved with this dog. So we're doing a lot of rewarding initially right here just for being in the presence of the other dog. And a lot of times, by the way, I will review the first steps in foundation work each time that we go out. Right at the beginning when we see a trigger, I'm just going to do step 1 and step 2 of my foundation work.
He does well with praise too. He does pretty well with praise too.
So we're kind of just loading that trigger again. We're doing step 1 and step 2. And then you'll see we gradually work up to movement. We walk around in the same space together. At this point, this dog was doing very well with this. So you can see she's much calmer. Her body language is really nice. She's really not even looking at the other dog, but she's going to get rewarded for walking nicely with me as I'm directing. So what we're doing is we're gradually getting closer and closer as we are moving through this space. Just a really nice example of how kind of calm. You can see she gave like a little bit of a look back there, but not much. So she's getting rewarded again. And this is a much different picture than when she was over aroused and excited when she saw the dog at that great big distance early on through the gate. So she's gradually becoming more and more comfortable with this whole concept. And look at that lovely focus. And we'll occasionally throw in some obedience as long as they're feeling comfortable enough to handle all of that. All right, so now we've got what to do out of neutral. Shift into drive or move forward. So if your dog chooses to look at you after that neutral position, so we've got our dogs in neutral position where we're letting them look at the trigger and we are waiting for them to make a decision. Now, I will give one caveat to that. With all of this, I really like to let my dog make a choice. But if I'm in a scenario out in the real world where there's somebody coming towards me as I'm trying to do this training with a potential trigger, we're not going to do this. I'm just going to turn around, encourage my dog to come with me and remove ourselves from the situation. We want to make sure we've got that quality piece where we are setting up all of these training scenarios and walks for success. So if your dog chooses to look at you out of that neutral after looking at the trigger, great. You're going to click and treat, you're going to praise, you're going to have a party with them, as you could see me doing in some of those videos. They made that correct decision, and we want this decision to be as rewarding as possible so that it happens again in the future. At this point, you can move around a bit and reset your position. So that's why this is drive or going forward. And if it seems like your dog struggled to look away from the trigger, so if they looked at it for a really long time, and I kind of have if my dog's looking at it for more than 3 seconds, if it's a really difficult trigger, I might make a little kissy noise or something to see if I can kind of get their attention back to me. But in general, I want to let them make that choice. If they struggled, I'm going to reset a little bit further back. And if it was easy for them, if they looked at the trigger and looked right back at me, then I might move forward a little bit and see if we can kind of play around with where that threshold is. And then we've got throw it into reverse. So really what this is if your dog does have a reaction, lunging, barking, etc., then you're going to immediately turn around and walk in the opposite direction away from the distraction. What's important to know about this is that this should only be used if something goes wrong. Essentially, training in the real world means that we can't control everything. So it's important to know what to do if a reaction occurs. But if you're having to use this step a lot, then you need to go back and revisit the basic foundations to set up better training sessions and walks. Because the idea is that we are creating enough scenarios where we have success, we're able to drive and move forward and not have to throw it into reverse. But if something happens, we need to know what to do. So if my dog out of the neutral position decides to react, I'm going to immediately turn around and walk in the opposite direction away from the distraction. I'm going to walk as quickly and briskly as I can, and I'm going to bring the dog along with me. I'm going to keep that same set length of leash. And if I need to pull them a little bit, that's okay. We want to get them out of that situation. At that point, I'm not going to look at my dog, talk to my dog, or try to get their attention. I'm just going to keep walking, facing the opposite direction until I'm far enough away that she stops reacting. Once I'm at the distance where they stop reacting, then I can go back to neutral and start over. Remember that if your dog reacts, she's over threshold. And although it's important to end on a good note when you're able to get focused at that distance, it also means that you're likely to have another reaction. And therefore, it would be best to finish the session after that point. And I have a wonderful video of, first we're going to talk about, well, this video is about utilizing different dogs. And then we're going to have one that has examples of all three pieces. So this is multiple different, there's a lot of distractions in this video, but there are multiple, or we want to set up multiple different scenarios as much as possible. If I only ever train in the same place with the same dog, then I'm probably not going to generalize this behavior very well. So as you can see in these videos that I'm showing, this dog has been exposed to many different potential triggers. So here, she's getting rewarded because she looked at me. She was able to refocus very nicely. Here she's with another dog. As my subtitle says. And you can see she's gradually becoming much more comfortable. She's still focused on me, which is my primary goal. I want her to trust that I am going to take care of her. I've got her. I won't let any of those other dogs do anything to her. She actually gets quite excited about other dogs. So I'm also not going to let her greet other dogs if she's that excited. It all kind of works within that same scenario. And then this is just a breakdown of all the things that I was talking about. So this is where we're moving forward. And then neutral is going to be when she looks at the trigger. That's when I'm going to stop moving forward right there. And then she quickly looked back to me, so she was able to be rewarded. And you'll see another example of this as the video goes on. Right there. So that was a neutral moment. She decided to look at the trigger, the other dog, and then I let her have that moment and she chose to look back at me. So she got rewarded. We had a little party and then we reset and we're moving forward again. And look at that. So this is, I think we're, oh, there's another neutral moment. Now, I actually started to move her away a little bit there because it was a little too close. What happened is both dogs went forward at the same time, but she actually made a point to turn around and come back to me. You can hear a little bit of whining, so this is a little exciting for her, but then she made that decision again. So I'm letting her make the right decision because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want our dogs to be making the decision. And this is going to be the example that you see of what to do if we have a reaction. And that was just a little lunge. She got really excited about him. And so we went back, we reset, and we started over. And then we made sure that we had just a nice, successful moment before we quit there. Same thing. Look at that. She looked back at me. Ultimately, what I want is that the dog makes the decision when they see the trigger to refocus on me. And that requires me building trust and a really nice learning history that they're going to get reinforced whenever that trigger is present. Look at that nice recovery. And I'm going to have her face me so that her back is to the dog. And I will change those things up every once in a while with the dog. I do a lot of verbal praise too. And that's it. So have fun training. And if this is something you're still struggling with, it's always very important to be able to find a qualified professional to help. You can check out CCPDT, which is the Council for Certification of Professional Dog Trainers, and locate a trainer near you if you're still struggling with this issue.
Right. Well, thank you, Katie. That was an amazing presentation and very useful, as I know this is a challenge that a lot of dog owners experience, especially in Los Angeles, since it's so busy and so dog focused, but there's lots of dogs in traffic and cars, so very informative. We actually had lots of engagement while you're talking, and actually had a couple past adopters mention that their dogs got excited when they heard your voice and the clicker and the training. So so Betty Davis said hi. So now we are going to get started and open up for questions. So feel free to go ahead if you have a question and use the Q&A function or the chat function to submit your questions. And one of the most asked questions that we've had so far is what to do if your dog's not treat motivated.
So there are a few things with that. One thing, the first thing that I always love to point out is as long as your dog is alive, they are treat motivated because every animal eats to survive. So it is sometimes not whether or not your dog is food motivated as much as maybe you haven't found what food your dog really likes, or maybe they don't put a whole lot of value in food because they've got food available all the time. And then the last element to that, and the one that I find most common when we're talking about reactivity with dogs, it's not that they're not food motivated, it's that they are actually over threshold already when they go outside. They're too excited and stimulated about the possibility of seeing a trigger, and so they're not able to eat. Really, what happens physiologically with a dog when they see a trigger, when they're likely to react, it's very much like if we are going to go into a scary situation. Let's say if you have a fear of public speaking and you're about to go in front of a whole bunch of people and speak, you are not hungry, right? Physiologically, your body goes into fight or flight. All of the blood in your body is going away from your digestive system to your muscles, ready if you need it. So the same thing happens to our dogs when we go out for a walk and they're expecting to see a trigger. They might take food just fine inside, but we go outside and they won't take food at all. What that actually tells us is that my dog is already a bit over threshold. My dog actually needs to go back to, can you just take treats maybe inside the front door, obviously leashed up and safe, but maybe open the front door and see if my dog can take treats there. And the one exception to that would be, I'd say, if at home your dog doesn't want to take any treats, well, then maybe we need to work on, how much food am I feeding my dog? Do we have a full food bowl all the time? Because sometimes that can create them being satiated, and then they really don't want to eat. So sometimes actually the first step is I'm going to teach my dog how to regularly take treats from me and have that be part of our behavior system. How do we work for food? Um, so there can be a lot of different things to that, but I would say all all living creatures are food motivated. We usually spend most of our existence outside of humans. Most animals spend most of their existence working to get food. So it is usually something that we can create a lot of motivation for. But if we don't have it, it may be a sign that we need to even take a step further back and just work on building that confidence in eating food, even in stressful situations.
Very, very true. And I know from firsthand experience with my leash-reactive dog that yes, what
Yeah,
you said is very true. So
yeah.
yes,
It
so
actually
we've had
means more distance, right?
yes,
More like
yep.
finding ways to be calm, or the first thing I would do with a dog who maybe takes treats inside, but doesn't take treats when we're out on a walk, is let me see if I can find a location that has no triggers and no distractions. Will they take treats there? That would be my outside of just having the front door open and being on leash right there, and then just being right outside the door. Will they take treats there? Next step is, can I find a neutral location that's calm enough where my dog will take treats?
Awesome, thank you. So we've had a couple questions also about age. So a dog's age, if that plays a factor into their leash reactivity and it potentially getting worse as they get older, as well as if a dog's neutered or not, if that also plays any roles into the
Oh,
reactivity.
those are
Sorry,
good
big question.
questions.
I know.
Yeah,
Everyone, there's
those are good
lots of
questions.
great questions.
So, in general, most puppies are not usually very reactive because they're still early on experiencing the world. And they're young, and puppies have a tendency to just kind of be very friendly and playful in general. But as they get a little bit older and we hit adolescence and we become adults, or our dogs become adults, we start to sometimes see that they can start developing some reactive behaviors. And some of that comes along with testosterone and other hormones that happen in adolescence. Some of it comes along with their genetic predisposition, that as they're coming out of those puppy elements, puppy behaviors, and they're coming into more adult behaviors, we're starting to see some of their more protective natures, or maybe even fear phases, which can happen also as they're growing up. We can sometimes see distinct spikes in their fear response to different stimuli. Um, if it is something that is happening in a kind of adolescent phase, that's when I really start to immediately address it, right? So we start doing these sessions right away. And as I mentioned a couple of times, I really like to focus a lot on utilizing these same exact methods and skills for prevention. I don't need an issue to crop up in order to address it. I can be working on making sure that it never comes up in the first place. And that's actually one of my favorite things to do. So when I have a young dog, we will go out, and every time we see something that could potentially be a trigger, a bike, a skateboard, a dog, a car, a human, my dog gets paid with food. I give him a treat and tell him, you are amazing because you didn't bark at that thing, right? Because it is such a common thing for them to do. It's a very natural tendency. And adolescence is really where you'll have a tendency to see that a lot. Dogs doing this more as they get older, that is definitely something that can happen if they're regularly rehearsing the behavior. So my dog's getting older. Every time they go out for a walk, they see another dog. Maybe they start out by being kind of neutral. They greet another dog. They don't like the experience. And so the next time they decide, maybe I'll bark a little bit at that dog. And what happens, of course, is that the other owner with that other dog goes, well, I'm not going to greet that dog that's barking at us. And so they walk away. And a little light bulb goes off over my dog's head and goes, oh, that worked. The dog didn't come up to me. I didn't have to have that unpleasant experience. I'm going to make sure I rehearse that and do it every time. And so it can easily become a regular habit. It becomes more and more common for the dog to do. So yes, it can get more as they get older if it's not worked on. And then as far as spaying and neutering and whether it influences this behavior, there is actually a lot of research. Not all of it comes to the same conclusions. So there's a lot of information out there that it can be a little contradictory. There's some information that says it can be helpful, some information that says it can be detrimental. So I will say that with male dogs, neutering usually limits some of the testosterone, and that can usually give them, usually make it so that they're less likely to have aggression towards other males. That's one of the things that has consistently been found. But outside of that, it's kind of hit and miss as to whether it has a big influence on this type of behavior. There's plenty of spayed and neutered dogs that have this issue, and there's plenty of intact dogs that have this issue. So I would say it's a little bit of a little kind of somewhere in the middle, not sure.
All right. Well, fair enough. Yes. So we've had one question asking about when do you stop using treats as a reward for this training?
So if my dog is 100% and they're not reacting to anybody anymore, then I can stop using the treats. That being said, I would still take treats. I would still take treats with me on the walk because I still want to pay my dog if they are doing well, especially if it's something that's really difficult. So I had a couple of pictures in my presentation of my Border Collie Opal, and she was my dog reactive dog that I had to really develop my skills to work on all of this with her. And even though she got to a point where she was absolutely wonderful around other dogs, I would still pay her with treats if something really difficult happened and she did well. So for instance, I remember there was a time where I had her in a down stay and I was actively doing something else. And I turned around and there were two giant bulldogs sniffing her while she was in the downstay, and she wasn't looking at them. She was looking directly at me because she knew what her job was. And I immediately went over to her. I told her she was absolutely fantastic. I released her out of the stay and I gave her a ton of treats because I don't care how well trained you are, that's hard. And for her, I knew it was especially hard. So when you can fade out of the treats, as soon as your dog's 100%, which is, it's hard for anybody to be 100% all the time, by the way. But I would still take treats. I would always have treats just to reward my dog for doing the right behavior in a context that is particularly difficult.
All right, thank you. So I know we are over on time a little bit, but we have two more big sets of questions that we've had a lot of people ask about. So I want to be able to address those before we leave. So the first grouping of questions we've had was on flip leashes and harnesses and which ones should they use. I know you went over that at the beginning of the presentation, but if you want to clarify and expand on that and refresh all of our memories.
Sure. So equipment is going to be a little bit specific to the dog. If I have a really, really big, strong dog, I might use a head halter because a head halter is going to give me the ability to control where my dog is directing their focus and directing their head. And it can actually allow me to kind of turn my dog back towards me, which is really useful with this type of work. If I have a dog who I think is very likely to lunge, or they really do an intense lunge, I might use a front connect harness because that way it's going to be, it has the least potential to do any damage, right? They're moving forward, but it's still, once again, going to turn them back towards me. But it doesn't put any pressure on their neck. Using slip leads or collars, I really don't like to use slip leads at all for this because it just tightens on the dog's throat, and then it can become a problem if they're not giving into that pressure, then they're actually choking. I don't want that to happen. And I would only use a flat collar or a martingale either as a backup, or if I'm already at a point in training where I know that I'm probably not going to get any of that lunging behavior anymore, then I can transfer over to a regular collar or martingale so that um, we're not potentially putting a lot of pressure on the trachea.
All right, thank you. So the other grouping of questions we've had is about if you live in a multi-dog household, like many of us do, and you have one dog that is leash reactive and your other dog might not be. How do you work on that? Because typically you walk both of your dogs together.
Yeah. So this is going to kind of depend on the relationship between the two dogs. So, or more dogs than two potentially. If I have my reactive dog is going to potentially influence the non-reactive dog. So usually that happens if my reactive dog is the older one and the non-reactive one is the younger one. Or if my non-reactive one is just heavily influenced and bonded to the reactive one, then I'm not going to walk those dogs together. The only time when I would walk a reactive dog with a non-reactive dog is if I know that my non-reactive dog is incredibly stable and comfortable and I'm going to use them to help influence my reactive dog. That's the only time I would do it. Any other time where there's a potential of that bad behavior, that behavior I don't like, bleeding into the other dog, I'm not going to do it. And it's much more common for those behaviors that we don't like. They have a tendency to spread like wildfire. They're just way more contagious than the good behaviors for the most part. You know, it's so common we do it as well, but so do our dogs. They get caught up in the excitement of everything. And so it's much more likely if I've got one reactive dog that they're going to actually cause the other one to be reactive. So I do my walk separately.
All right, man. I'm more exercise for both the dogs and for us as well. So good. And then also kind of off that question, if you live in a home with multiple people who all walk the dogs, what is the best setup to set that dog up for success? Is it having just one person walk the dog, or should everybody in the home be familiar with how to work with this dog?
Yeah, it's actually best if everyone is doing the same work, because then the dog learns that this whole scenario exists regardless of who's handling them. But that can be particularly difficult sometimes. So if only one person is comfortable with doing this work and is well versed in it, then that should be the only person that's walking the dog. If everybody's ready to get on board and they're comfortable with it and we can all learn together, then anybody could walk the dog.
All right, fantastic. So I think that's all the time we have for questions, because we've gone over a little bit on our time, but I know that this is a very important topic for a lot of us that live in the area. So thank you so much to you all for submitting your questions. If we weren't able to get to your question specifically, please go ahead and email us at communications@annenbergpetspace.org. We'll put the email address also in the chat so you can grab it from there. And also this recording will be on our website, so feel free to go back and refer to it and rewatch it again, or share with anybody you know who is also struggling with a leash reactive dog. So before we wrap things up, I'd like to extend an invitation to some of our upcoming events. If any of you are cat lovers or know someone who's looking to adopt a cat, we are holding a special Cat-orama adoption event next week, which is why I have our fun cat virtual background. So it'll be on Saturday, June 19th. Admissions is free and we'll have activities, raffles, free food, and more. So please sign up at annenbergpetspace.org. And for those of you who are looking to continue your dog's training journey with us, we regularly host Mutt Manners training classes for a variety of skill levels with Katie here. And you can find our latest offerings on our website. And thank you again, Katie, for taking the time out of your very busy day working with all of the PetSpace animals to present all of this wonderful information to us. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining with us this evening and for continuing to support Wallace Annenberg PetSpace. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.